everybody, I'm Miss Kaleigh and welcome back to week 2 of my directing class here on Wonderland Performing Arts, Wonderland TV. Now, if you missed week 1, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the class. This is a class for anyone who's interested in becoming a director. So that can be teen all the way up through adults, or if you're just this episode's going to be about casting, so if you're just curious about my crazy casting process, then you might want to keep watching for that. So my very first class last week, which you can find here on Wonderland TV, was about what makes a good director, and then we went into show selection. We talked about that a little bit. So it's a good one to go back to, but you absolutely don't have to have watched that one to appreciate or get the information from this one. I did have a couple of questions and got some feedback from last week about the class. So one of the questions was, what about if there are multiple productions of a show in the same area? So this is most common, I've found, with children's shows because there's such a limited pool of shows to pick from. So you're going to see a lot of Disney shows done multiple times, Shrek, things that are family friendly, things that kids want to be in, things that people know are going to sell. So you continue to see those pop up at children's theaters, which I, for one, don't see that as a huge problem if multiple productions of the same show are taking place within a year, 2 years, something like that. Because a lot of times those audiences are going to be very specific, for children's shows, are going to be very specific to parents and family members of the kids that are in that show. Children's shows, while some people from the community certainly might go out and see them and, you know, enjoy them and things like that. I know I go to see a lot of the kids shows in the area, but I'm a theater freak, so you're not going to be necessarily hitting up that theater community with your children's show. And so if you're doing High School Musical and someone else in the area 6 months later is also doing High School Musical, it's probably not very likely that those audiences are going to overlap much unless it's me and I go see everything. So I would say that it's not a huge concern, but I would challenge you to look for those underdone shows. A lot of times we just do what we've seen before and what we've heard of without doing the homework and looking into finding if there are other good shows. This last summer I did Snoopy at Abbey Players, and it's very underdone. It had not been done in the area at all, and I don't even think it had been done much in the state of Louisiana. We were one of the only productions going on in the South when it was happening. And it did super well. It had name recognition because, you know, Snoopy, and it's an excellent show, but people don't know it, so people don't do it. So I would challenge you to look for those shows. See if you can find something that is not overdone, that that people haven't just done into the ground in your area, and be that person, be that pioneer that's out there doing something a little bit different, if at all possible. And I'm going to say the same thing, honestly, for community theater productions. Now, I don't think that it's a great thing if multiple community theaters in a region are doing the same show in the same year, but if it's been a few years and you're in, you know, we're doing something in New Iberia and the last people that did it were in downtown Lafayette, again, that audience is probably not going to be the same group of people for the most part. New Iberia at IPAL, we have our very specific audience of people that come to see our shows, and they're not going to be bothered by the fact that somebody in Lafayette did the show a few years ago. They're going to want to see IPAL's production of that show. So yes, it's something to consider. Yes, it's somewhat of a concern if you're the 4th production of Shrek or something in an area, but in general, I don't think audiences overlap except for theater people. And but I do encourage you to go out and try to be that person finding the unique shows that have not been done in your area. It's more difficult because you actually have to do some homework and do things that you haven't necessarily seen in person, but the reward can be much greater. Second question was, what about questionable content in a show? Now, here's the thing. Shows, when you purchase the rights for them, have to be presented exactly how they are written, because the rights cover that. So if there is a questionable slur, if there is a word in your script, you purchase the rights to do that script exactly as is. So don't think I'm going to purchase the rights for Grease and then clean it up. That is not legal. And you can actually get your theater in a bunch of trouble, and they could have to pay fines, and they could be banned from actually getting shows from a particular booking or rights agency if you do that. And you may think, oh, well, they're never going to be checking up on me. They're never going to find out. Chances are someone in that audience will know that show and know if you cut things out, changed a song, did something different, and they can tell the booking company, the rights company, they can tell MTI that you did a wrong version of the show, and MTI can tell you to stop. So while MTI may not be there every time, you have to think about your own respectability and what you are doing. The playwright wrote the show as they wrote it, and if you aren't doing the show as they wrote it, then you shouldn't do the show. You can request changes. I know I worked for a professional theater in New Hampshire, and New Hampshire, they just couldn't handle a lot of the F word. Like, they could handle one F word a season is what they said. And so they petitioned the company, I think it was Dramatist or something like that, like, can we cut down to just this one F word? Do you have substitutions that we can use? And they okayed it. They said it was fine. They gave them substitutions to use. Next to Normal, the show I was in last year at Abbey Players, actually has a list of substitutions that you must use if you decide to change specific words for content. You can't change it to whatever you want. You have to change it to what the people who wrote the show said. Also, there are children in school versions of shows. I know Les Mis has a school version. Even Avenue Q has a school version. Hairspray, that have been cleaned up. The content is changed so that you can do it with students. So that's something to look into as well. But I will say, don't go into a production thinking that you are going to change something to make it clean for your community and get away with it and feel good about it. You should ask the people who are licensing your show if you can do that. So that is my answer to those questions. So talking a little bit about rights, I know when we were talking about picking shows last week, I mentioned this briefly, but yes, you do have to have rights for a production before you can put it on. Honestly, you have to have rights for a production before you announce auditions, before you tell people you're doing the show. A lot of shows, you might not know if the rights are actually going to be available or if they're going to approve the rights for your theater to do that particular show. I know right now there are several shows touring, and although you may have seen recent local productions of them, you can't get the rights for those shows right now. MTI does an excellent job of keeping their website up to date with what shows are actually available for rights and which ones are either limited or say, the rights aren't going to be available for a little while, something like that. You can also call them and say, hey, are the rights available right now for this? Or you can put in a perusal request. All of these things are good to do. You should not go around telling people that you're doing a particular show unless you have secured the rights for that particular show. So that's a big thing. Also, I would say that you need to read that perusal script. Don't assume that because you know a movie that you know the show. There are several shows that are very, very different than the movie version. So I wouldn't pick a show based only on the movie. I find the script of Grease to be horrible. Like, I think that the actual script that you can license for Grease is terrible, in my opinion. And there are not, some of the songs, the most famous songs from the movie are not in the show. You cannot license those songs. So, both of those things can be an issue. Also, Grease is like double the cost of rights for a normal show. So all of these things you should think about going in, especially before you announce that you're doing a particular show, because you might be surprised, one, by the script and how it differs from whatever movie you've seen, and two, by the rights availability, because a lot of things you can't get rights for, or you can only get rights for a school edition or something like that. So definitely look into that, and do not announce that you have auditions coming up for something unless you have secured the rights for your theater. So that's our little bit of a recap from last week, and answering questions and kind of tying up those loose ends. I'm going to move now into honestly one of my favorite subjects as a director, which is casting. And look, I'm going to show you my notes right here. Y'all, I have a lot to say about casting. And I'm going to preface this right off the bat just by saying that every director has their own method of casting. There are many directors who will disagree with what I'm telling you today about casting because they have their own thing that they do. And you cannot assume that every director thinks the way you do or thinks the way I do. I'm just going to give you my thoughts, and I would certainly love to hear your feedback on my thoughts. This is how I approach casting, and I'm going to tell you the reasons why for each of the things that I'm going to talk about, why I approach casting in this particular way. Casting is one of the things that I find most enjoyable and exciting about the whole directing experience. And so I put a ton of thought into casting and why I do certain things. I have long debates with people about, well, what do you think about this and what do you think about that when it comes to casting? Just general things. So I have put a lot of thought into it, and I'm going to tell you what my thoughts are. So I'm going to cover auditions, callbacks, your team, listening to your team, double casting, understudies, and other kind of periphery things regarding casting. So I'm going to get into that a little bit. So first off, auditions. Now, whatever show that you are deciding to do, you need to become very familiar with those characters and with the script first so that you can know what you want to have your auditioners do at the auditions. You need to see their range of skills and if it lines up with what you're looking for in the show. Do not assume, once again, that the movie is what needs to happen in your casting for your show. I encourage you to read the script and to go through for each of the characters and list the traits, physical features, and things that are required for that character, and things that you may have had as preconceived notions that are not required. For example, in Grease, we'll go back to Grease since we were talking about that a little bit. Everyone is so familiar with the movie Grease that they believe that Sandy, number one, has to be Australian or has to speak with an Australian accent, or number two, has to be a blonde. Never in the script is it mentioned that Sandy is a blonde. We just think of Sandy as a blonde because of Olivia Newton-John. When Laura Osnes competed to be Sandy and You're the One That I Want on the reality show, she won the competition and was brunette Sandy in the revival of Grease on Broadway. And a lot of people were like up in arms about that because how can a brunette be Sandy? It doesn't say that she has to be a blonde. It never says it. In a recent production that I assistant directed, we approached the casting in a very kind of colorblind way, and we cast an African-American man in a role that was in the turn of the century, right around the 1900s, 1890, in the role of a newspaper reporter. Is that what would have been in the time period? No. Did it take away from the show at all? No, not in the least. It added to it because he was such an amazing actor. It never said in the script that the guy is white, and the story is not a race story. So we felt perfectly fine casting without even thinking about race. I directed Into the Woods several years back at a middle school, and I swear it was one of the most colorblind productions of Into the Woods you can imagine. Jack's mom was black, Jack was white. Like, we had all different races mixed through the whole show, and nobody was what you would have assumed their race should have been. And no one in the audience at a middle school, no one said a word, because it didn't say it in the script. It wasn't the story of race, and so it wasn't talked about, so it didn't matter. So in that case, you should definitely try to strip away your preconceived notions about this person has to be this person has to be blonde, this person has to be, really pretty, or whatever it is. Age, that's something else that you can consider. I mean, how old does the person have to be? That one's a little more, usually it's a little more specific, but you also have to think about how people look, because I know a lot of 20-year-olds pass for high school students. So if you're casting something that has a high school student and a 20-year-old is perfect for the role, that's something to consider. So go through that script and think, what does this role actually require of a person? What do they absolutely have to have? And what did I think in my mind ahead of time that they needed that they might not need to have? So, and like I said, I made this point last week. If it is a story of race, if it is talking about a specific story of race or age or gender, you have to tell that story appropriately and cast the appropriate people for that story. Okay, so know the cast, know the characters, know the show, and not just the movie. Don't get in your head about, oh, this person looks exactly like the person looked in the movie, it's gonna be perfect. No, you have to cast the best person for that role, regardless, and try to put aside your preconceived notions. Now, I'm gonna come back around to this, but I do think that you should take into account how people's chemistry works together on stage, and if they look appropriate age differences from each other. I was in a production several years ago where this guy was supposed to be married to this woman. The woman that they cast in the role was in her 40s, and the guy was straight out of high school, and it was obvious. They did not look like they should be married. And so the whole time anybody was watching that show, it just felt a little uncomfortable. They were both amazing actors, and they were decent together, but it was very uncomfortable to watch. So you have to think about those things too. So yeah, those things can factor into your decision. It's going to be important. All right, so I'm going to move on now to recruiting and working with people who like to work with you. This is probably somewhat of a touchy spot for some people because a lot of people see it as precasting. And I'm going to say that I absolutely do not precast, and I have a problem with people who do precast with community theater. I mean, if you're on Broadway and in order to put up a show, you've got to have Sutton Foster and Hugh Jackman, absolutely precast. If I had Hugh Jackman, I would precast him in every single thing I did. But this isn't Broadway, this is community theater, and the idea is to give the opportunities to people who want to volunteer and be part of your community theater production. And if you're precasting and going into everything with a definite notion of what you want, who you want in each role, you're not allowing for any of that spontaneity in the audition process, and you're not allowing for people to grow and come into theater and start to appreciate it that may not have opened themselves up to it before. I went into a production in a little town in Mississippi, and I had never auditioned for them before. And the guy knew everybody but me. And if he had precast that and decided not to cast me at all, I would have missed out on an excellent experience. And he would have missed out on having someone, that had a lot of experience in theater on his stage and presenting, what I had. So yeah, definitely think about those things. Now, having said that, you want to make sure that you're going to have people coming to audition for your show that can fill the roles. You don't want to show up to an audition and have no one show up, and or just a handful of people, and you have to beg, borrow, and steal to get the rest of the cast. That's a horrible, sickening position to be in, and honestly, it's one that scares me the most as a director. I'm probably not afraid of anything like I'm afraid of being stuck without a cast. So I call people that I like, that are talented, that I know can do things in theater that I've worked with before, or I email them or message them and I say, hey, I'm doing this show, I'd love you to come audition. That's it. If they have questions about it, I absolutely answer them. But I try to contact people and ask them to come audition for me. Specifically, we actors, you know, because I act too, we have egos. Surprise. Actors love to think that they're wanted, to know that they're wanted in a role, and that a director thinks about them enough to hope that they'll audition for their show. People love that. And so it doesn't do any harm to say to someone, hey, you're really talented, please come audition for my show. I want to put together a collection of the most talented and driven people that I can when I'm doing a show, because I want it to be the best it can be. And if that means that I need to call somebody up and say, I want to work with you, or, you know, when I see them, that doesn't do any harm. It might do really great things for my show. And so that is what I do. I like to do that because I want people to know that I appreciate their talent and I would like to work with them. Some people have a problem with this, but you know what? I point out Lin-Manuel Miranda. I point out Andrew Lippa. These composers, when they write their shows, they work with the same people over and over and over again. Lin-Manuel Miranda, if you look at the cast of In the Heights, it's almost like there are a lot of people that were in the Heights that came back and were in Hamilton. I mean, Anthony Ramos got his start in the Heights with Lin-Manuel Miranda. And there are just so many people that he works with over and over and over again because he knows they work well together, he appreciates their talent, and he wants to give them a platform to do their amazing things. And I think that's great. Andrew Lippa does the same thing. He works with Kate Baldwin. He loves Kate Baldwin's voice, and she's done about 3 or 4 Andrew Lippa shows, and she's amazing. And I think that if you look at it, I mean, Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio, directors like to work with people who do a good job of interpreting their vision to the stage or to the screen. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. With work, if you enjoy working with a director and you want to work with them again and again and again, or vice versa, you're a director and you want to work with an actor over and over again because they do such a good job of converting your vision to the screen or the stage, I think that is a perfectly legitimate reason to cast someone. And some people call it favoritism or something or other. It's only favoritism if you're ignoring someone better and more driven in, you know, that's equal or, you know, like I said, better in your casting process. So that's what I believe about it. And everybody else is, you know, free to have their own opinions about it. So I think that it's a good idea to develop a group of people that like to work with you, that you like to work with. And I'm always looking for talented people to add to my people I trust, my people I work with. So I would love my group of people that I love to work with to be 50, 100, however big, so that I have my pick every time I go into auditions. I have my pick of amazing people that love working with me. That is my goal. So, auditions. When you are having auditions for a musical, people do them a lot of different ways. Obviously, the 3 things that you're going to be needing to take under consideration with holding auditions for a musical is singing, acting, and dancing. Not every show requires a lot of dancing, and many shows don't require your lead role person to actually be a fantastic dancer. Some do, but not all of them. So you need to think about each of those characters and what is actually required of each of them and what you need to see at the audition. Can they do this before you decide and make your decision about what role that they should be? A lot of people, and even on Broadway, they do this. In the initial audition, they put the singing and acting together so that you can judge their singing and acting based on a strong song performance that they've chosen, that they have they act within as they are singing. I want all the information possible, as much information as I can get. And so beyond that, I like to do scenes as well, but that's completely up to you. Because someone doing a scene is different than someone acting within a song, in my opinion. Also, some people are really bad at cold reading scenes and really great at singing in songs, and vice versa. So you might see something in their acting audition with the scene that you would not see in the song. Or maybe they just chose a bad song, and because actors are notorious for not choosing the best song for their voice, etc., etc. So the more I see, the more information I have going in. And here's another thing, is I do like to go see productions in the area a lot so that I can see these actors in other formats, because some people are really bad at auditioning. A lot of directors like to base the auditions completely and who they're casting completely on the audition the day of, and try to be as fair as possible. I think that is short-sighted in community theater. I think that because we have the opportunity to see people in other roles and other theaters and things like that, we should take that opportunity and see as much of what someone can do and as much of what they can offer as possible. My husband just got home, sorry. I think we should see as much as we can possibly out of someone and really look at the whole range of what they are capable of doing on your stage. Trying to say I'm only going to base it on what they do this day and this audition, I think that you're tying your hands behind your back if you do that, because someone might just have an off day, a bad audition, and are you going to penalize your show? Some people see it as, I'm penalizing them. They had a bad day. Oh well, I'm trying to be fair. Is being quote unquote fair in that way a benefit or a hindrance to your show? If you know what someone is capable of doing and you've seen it, then you need to be fair to yourself and be fair to your show and do what is best for the show. Absolutely. Hey James, can you not walk right now? It's making noise. Sorry. So, like I said, some people will disagree with me on that and think that the only way to be fair is to judge a person by the specific day that they are in your audition room. And I disagree. I think you have to do what's best for the show. And if you've seen someone be absolutely amazing multiple times or just once even, and they have a bad audition, I think you have to take everything into account. But that's my personal opinion about that. Okay, so we were talking about the singing and the acting and the dancing. For the acting, I like to pull audition sides from the script ahead of time and have people read, have people cold read together. Like I said, some people are amazing cold readers, some people are not. I like to post my audition scenes actually up on my audition webpage ahead of time so that people have a chance. They're not cold reading, because cold reading is a specific skill and it does not translate to what is going to be good on stage. People that are going to be on your stage, your cast, they will have had a chance with the script to analyze it, to get better at it. So why are we judging them on their ability to pick up a scene and do it off the cuff? Why does that mean that they're going to be good in your show? It doesn't. So if I can at all do it, I post my scenes ahead of time so that people can look and see what the scene is, so they can analyze it and they can act it appropriately like they would if I cast them in my show. There's a lot of discussion about, should you do a song from the show or should you not? Should you have people do songs that are not from the show? And I think as a director, that's completely up to you. The old adage of don't do a song from the show goes back to this idea that what if someone presents a song from the show in a way that completely conflicts with the director's vision of that song, and therefore you've shot yourself in the foot because whatever the director had envisioned you didn't do, and therefore you're not going to get the role. So you should do something from something else so the director can just see your talent, then they can decide if they want you in their vision for their show. As the director, you can make that decision yourself. Is your vision for the show so specific that if you see someone come in and do an amazing job with a song, but it wasn't really what you pictured, are you going to penalize them, or are you going to give them a chance to show you your own vision through direction? So it's really, like I said, it's up to the director. I go back and forth. For the most part, I like to have songs from the show sung because it shows people doing their homework, putting some time into my show ahead of time. It lets me know that they're going to be reliable. They're going to do some work for me. They're going to try. They're actually really interested in the show, because to actually have to go and learn a song from a show, a new song, not just something that's in your audition packet, it requires a little bit of effort. And if somebody's willing to put forth a little bit of effort to come audition for my show, I really respect that a lot, because I'm a person who puts a ton of effort into my shows, and so I want my actors to put in effort as well. There is nothing that you can do to make me respect your acting in an audition or your performance in an audition less than to come completely unprepared. That's me as a director. Other people are like, hey, they're talented, it doesn't matter if they're unprepared. That's not how I do things. That's not how I see things. For me, if someone is willing to prepare and work for my audition, they're going to be willing to prepare and work for me when I'm directing them in the actual show. So it's important to me. And that's what I'm going to say about that. So I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Do you like, as a director, do you think you want to have people sing songs from the show, or sing songs that they're just really good at so that you can see their level of talent? The other thing is, with going to singing and what songs they're singing from the show or not, is depending on your knowledge of music, you might want to go ahead and have them sing something from the show so that you know that they can actually hit the notes required of that particular character. Remember when I said you should list the things that are required of a character? Well, if a belted E is required of a character, you need to hear the person belt the E. So if you do not know enough about music to know whether that's being done appropriately, or if someone is singing a particular song on pitch, or actually achieving something that you need to have happen in the show, then you need to have a team with you that can tell you those things. I know enough about music that I don't personally need someone to tell me if someone is in tune or if they're singing a song appropriately, so on and so forth. I trust the opinions of my people on my team because I pick my team so carefully. We talked about that last week. But I'm not going to let a team member tell me, oh, that person was flat, we shouldn't cast them, when I know they weren't flat, or I know the show well enough to know what is required and that they can do it, or I've seen them in something else and I know that person is not normally flat, they sounded this way because, and I still want to cast that person. I'm not going to go off something that just a team member says and not trust my own intuition and what I know. Now, like I said, if you don't know, then you need to have team members with you that can help you with those specific areas, with those specific holes in your knowledge. So those are definitely all things to think about. As a director, you are the one whose name is going to be on the production. It is known as your production. You are the one helming it. So you have to trust all of the decisions you make. And if you decide to change a decision that you felt good about based on something a team member said, you're always going to question that throughout the process, especially if something goes wrong or isn't particularly good or exactly how you wanted it to be. It's only your fault if you don't go with your gut and if you don't go with what you know. Now, if you don't know, like I said, trust people and get them to help you. So, songs, we talked about that a little bit. And like I said, if you're looking for someone to act within a song, then, you know, that they're going to have picked a good song for that. And it's something you definitely want to consider. Cold reading versus giving them the chance ahead of time to prepare it. We talked about that. Now we're going to talk about dance auditions. Like I said, not every musical requires or needs a dance audition, but some do. And you need to know who needs to be able to dance and at what level. And you should definitely talk this over with your choreographer and make sure that you guys are on the same page with what level people need to be able to dance. I encourage you to have your choreographer make the dance audition a little bit more difficult than the actual choreography is going to be in the show. And here's why. It's another opportunity for you to see someone trying to be in your show, to see if they can take direction, to see if they can handle a little bit of stress, and if they're willing to keep trying for you, or if they're the type person that makes excuses and gives up. I don't like to cast people who make excuses and give up. So with that dance audition, it gives me a chance to see someone putting forth effort, even when it's difficult, trying, staying to it, staying at it, and not giving up and not making excuses. So that's a personal preference. And even though I'm not, I mean, I know some about dancing and I'm not the most technical dancer or anything like that, as a director, that's what I'm in there looking for during that dance audition. And it's kind of it might be a little bit of a sneaky thing, but I'm looking for people's personalities, and I'm looking to see, is this a person I can work with? And I'm testing them. And sometimes I might ask somebody in one of the readings I might give them a little bit of direction. Okay, can you do it again, but do it this way? Or do you have another song? Or do you have this? Or do you have that? Can you do this? Or go and look at this a little bit and then come back and do it again. Because I'm giving them direction. I'm seeing if the person is willing to accept my direction and if we communicate well together. So that's another trick that you might want to use. You might consider. If someone is completely flustered by you trying to give them a little bit of a direction, or not willing to do something that they may see as silly because you've asked them to, that might not be a person that you want to work with. Something to consider. So those are all the different elements of an audition. You can decide if you want to have them over one day or two. I really don't have a particular preference on that. Sometimes I like to do two, just to give the most amount of people a chance to actually make my audition. But you can do it with only one. It really just depends on the size of your cast and what you're going for. The next thing I want to talk about is callbacks. I think callbacks are optional, but they can be a great tool. And here are my thoughts on callbacks. Anytime I've had callbacks, they've been an excellent tool for me to see who is actually willing to learn the material and work on something for my show. That is what I've seen the most in callbacks. And a lot of times I've seen people grow and or adapt into roles based on their effort going into callbacks. When I first, that production of Into the Woods I mentioned, I had no idea what skill level the kids had coming into my auditions. You know, I saw their initial audition, and so I kind of got some sort of idea, but I could not slot them into particular roles at that point. I didn't know their work ethic. I didn't know these kids. And so I had extensive callbacks. I gave them songs to learn. I had them come in and learn songs with me after school. I gave them scenes to work on, scenes to learn. I told them about their characters. And quite honestly, I looked to see who had rides to come and pick them up, because it was an elementary, a production at a middle school. Those are all things to consider. How hard is someone willing to work for you, and how much can they grow under your direction? That's what callbacks can show you. Last year at Snoopy auditions, I did callbacks a week later, and I told everybody which roles they were called back for, and I gave them specific things to prepare for the callbacks for the next week. And that was really beneficial. If I had cast the show on that one day based on that one performance that they came in with, it would have been very different than how I casted the show after callbacks. So, and I know that the show is better because I had the callbacks. I think if a show is a smaller cast and you know your people that are auditioning for you very well, I think you can get away without doing callbacks. I think sometimes for a play, callbacks aren't necessarily needed. Sometimes you can just ask people to stay later and work more specifically with them on scenes, try different actors together to see how that chemistry works, how they look together and things like that. You may not need to do a whole nother day for callbacks. You might just need somebody to come back in and read something for you again, or you might need to give them a little bit of direction, and let's see how that works. So I think callbacks are definitely something to consider, especially if you don't know the people who are going to be auditioning for you very well, and if it's a large cast, and if you want to see how hard people are willing to work for you and work under your direction for a particular role. So those are all recommendations about callbacks. It also gives you a chance, like I said, to see that chemistry between characters and to see, oh, that's not going to work. She's so much older than he is. I cannot put them in those roles. Where else can I put them, and see how that goes? So it just gives you more time. Some people really like to make a casting decision very quickly. I like to think about it. I don't drag it out or take time beyond what is needed or useful to me, but I also don't like to jump in the water right away. I like to know that I feel good about my decision, and callbacks are a great way to do that. One of the big questions that and controversies, I guess, that I have in my own mind about casting is whether it's a good idea to cast someone that is better, just more talented in a role, or someone who is right for a role. And this is something that I've kind of continued to struggle with over the years, and it's something that I'm always asking myself. Like, is it better to put your most talented person that has auditioned for you in the lead role because they're leading the show, or is it better to put them in the role they are right for in the show and see the whole show come together? And I'm going to say that I haven't come up with a true consensus on this. In general, though, my personal belief is that you should put your better people in stronger roles, more so than worrying about how people fit the role. Now, if it's something weird, like we talked about earlier with the guy being married to a woman that was like 30 years older than him and it felt completely awkward, maybe they were the most talented people, but putting them in those roles together made the whole audience feel awkward the whole time. So no, you don't want to do something that's going to make your show awkward, but you want to bring up the level of your entire show talent-wise. And if you have your most talented person in a lesser role, then you might not be doing that. Now, this is not talking about people who come in that are maybe really talented that you don't know. I'm talking about specifically looking at the talent level of everybody that's auditioned for you and trying to decide whether you should put somebody in that suits the role or is more talented. If you have people that are equal or pretty close to equal and you can spread them out and have a lot of like really strong leads, then yeah, absolutely you need to think about who is right for what role, and so on and so forth, and make those casting decisions based on that. But in general, in community theater, if you want to elevate the entire production, the best way to do that is to have your leads across the board be stronger, regardless of how well they might fit the role in your mind. And that's just how I feel about that. So I'd love to hear if you disagree with me, if you think that people should always just be put in the role that's right for them. I think sometimes stretching the audience's idea of what something should be is a strong choice. And like I said, you need to be most concerned about the strength of your show overall. Double casting is another really controversial issue with casting a show, and I've had lots of feelings about this over the past, and I've been involved with shows where I double cast, and I've been involved with shows where I didn't. And at this point in my directing career, I feel like double casting is only useful in educational theater, where you want to give as many children the opportunity as possible to learn a role and to experience a role, and only if those children are absolutely equal and you cannot make a decision between the two. In community theater, I'm going to say buck up and make a decision. Just choose. see who works well together, the chemistry between your actors. Do not double cast, because it's only going to make your job harder, and it's going to make every single actor in the production's job harder. Even if they weren't the one that was double cast, it's going to make it more difficult than them, because they've got to do all the scenes twice, double, with different people, and try to act off of different actors. And it's incredibly hard, and it just makes your rehearsal process way more strenuous, and you honestly need more time for rehearsals, because you have to try to make it work with both of the actors in your roles that you've double casted. The whole production is going to suffer and be less good than it could be if you cast just one person in one role. Educational theater, like I said, if you feel the need to give multiple people opportunities to play the roles, and you are educating children, then double casting might be something to consider. Other than that, I really think it's a bad decision. I will say that I believe that understudies can be a strong decision. My only show that I have had understudies for, I absolutely loved having understudies, and I made them true understudies. I really made them learn the songs and the blocking and everything. It was more work for me, because I worked some alone with the understudies, just one-on-one. But we did an understudy performance with the understudies, and they all absolutely loved the experience of being in the show, being an understudy, and getting a chance to perform in the understudy performance. It wasn't as polished as the main show, but they got to do it for family and friends, and I feel really great about that experience. And ironically enough, it's the only production that I've had that somebody didn't drop out, and I needed like somebody to come fill in and or take over that role because I had understudies. So another controversial issue with casting is directors casting themselves. And I will say that I do not think it's a good idea for a director to cast themselves in a show, especially from the outset. If something happens in the middle of your show and you absolutely can't get anyone to fill in that part, through begging and borrowing and pleading or whatever, then maybe you might have to fill in and do it. But if you're starting out casting yourself in a show, you are already tying your hands behind your back and hamstringing the production, because the scenes that you are in, you are not going to be able to see how they work on the stage. And no matter how many people that you think you have that are going to tell you what to do, and that, oh, this looks good, that looks good, you need to do this, you need to do that, you're the director, and they're not going to be able to tell you with your vision, even if you trust them 100%. But I know that it's hard for anybody to tell the director, hey, you need to be doing this differently, or maybe you should try this line differently. Like, nobody's going to tell you that. And so you're going to be the one up there with no direction, because you can't direct yourself. So I think you're only going to be weaker and drag your own show down, because no one's willing to stand up and tell you what you need to do to make yourself a better actor on stage if you're in your own production. Also, you take up a lot of your time. You're splitting and distracting yourself from the things that you've got to be worried about. If something goes wrong during the show and you're in it, how are you going to fix or problem solve during that show? So I think it's something that is a last case, a last resort if there are no other options, and if something happens emergency-wise in the rehearsal process. But I don't think a director should ever start out from the outset thinking, I'm going to be in my own show. But that is my opinion again, and some people might disagree with me. One thing on that is I don't pick shows as a director that I want to be in. That's kind of one of my things. So I won't be tempted to do that. I don't pick shows that have a great role for me, because like I don't want that to be like in the back of my mind while I'm casting, like, oh, if somebody's not good enough, I could always do it. That to me is a dangerous place to go, and just leads to me potentially giving myself a stage and being a diva, and I just don't think that's a great idea. My last note on casting is, don't be afraid to not cast people. A lot of times in community theater, we think that everybody that comes out for auditions, we need to put them in the show somehow because, oh my gosh, they were so nice to come out to my audition. You want to put the best version of a show up as possible. And if you feel uncomfortable with someone being in the show for whatever reason, it is not a good idea to cast that person in your show just to be nice. Some people don't want to tell people, I didn't cast you in my show. And to that, I say, if you don't have the gumption to do that, then you should not be directing a production, because directing takes some gumption and it takes some bravery. And if you're not brave enough to tell someone, I did not cast you in my show, then you might not have enough bravery to direct. I personally like to call people individually and tell them, or ask them if they will be in my show, to tell them what role that I've cast them in and ask them if they accept. And yes, I call people and tell them that I have not cast them in the show. Unless it's a really, really enormous musical or something like that, and I haven't put people in like the ensemble or something like that. When I release the cast list, then those people can find out that way. But all of my named characters, I call individually and say, I've cast you in this role, will you accept it? And I do that before I put the cast list out, so that if someone says no, I can replace them then before I've put the cast list out, and I don't cause anyone any uncomfortable feelings about it. Because maybe I didn't intend to cast someone at all, but someone turned down a role. Well, they were my second option, and so now I can put them in that role, and they don't feel bad about themselves, and nobody thinks or is talking behind their back, oh, they weren't actually really in the cast originally. They just got in because so-and-so said no. I think you can avoid a lot of that just by being upfront and talking to people before you release that cast list. But that is, again, my own personal preference and how I like to do things, because I don't like to just spring things on people and then to have to make changes later. I want things to stay the same as much as possible. And I guess that's going to be my last point, is that no matter how much planning that you can do going into casting a show, it is never going to turn out like you thought it was going to. I've not once yet had a show turn out casting-wise like I predicted in all the months of planning and preparation leading up to that show. And I make so many lists of people who I hope come to my auditions, people who have told me they're coming to my auditions, people who might come. I make so many lists, and I think, okay, what could they do? What could they do? What could they do? And I kind of think, this is what my show is going to be. And then I go into auditions, and it is never what I have predicted. So be prepared to make decisions that might even surprise you, that you might surprise yourself with in that audition room. Be open to casting someone who is new to your company but is very talented. Maybe you've seen them do other shows in the area and you're like, I remember that person from that show. They're very talented. Take a chance on them. Maybe it's someone that has been, a workhorse for your company and has come in and done great work for you over and over and over again. And now you finally have a role that you can give them a chance to be a lead. Take that chance. Give them the chance to be a lead. If they suit the role and they are somebody that you enjoy working with, I say, like I said, make those decisions that are going to make the show the best it can be, and trust yourself and your own intuition going in. I said that was my final thing, but that's not completely my final thing. If people come into your audition room having prepared what you asked them to, or having prepared something that is to be incredibly difficult and having worked very hard on it, make sure that you recognize that talent and that ability, and not just judge the performance based on maybe what they did in that moment. If somebody comes into my audition room and sings an incredibly difficult song and does a very good job of it, versus someone who comes in and sings a very easy song but does amazing, I'm gonna give that person a chance who chose the more difficult song to show themselves and their talent to me completely. I'm going to respect their choices and their decisions for what they have worked really hard on. Because as a director, what I value most in my actors, and this is just a me thing, is hard work and willing to accept direction from me. So that's my advice on that, is make sure you're paying attention to what the person has actually brought to the audition, difficulty-wise, preparation-wise, work-wise, and how hard they're willing to work with you, and how much and how they've worked with you before, maybe, and what you've seen them do. Take all of that into consideration, and then let go and surprise yourself and make the decisions that are going to be best for your show and that are going to elevate your show to the strongest it can absolutely be. Okay, so that really was the end. I would love to answer any questions that you have about casting a show. I would love to hear your thoughts about if you agree, disagree with me about anything I've said about casting a show, and I will address those next week. We're going to be back here again next Thursday at 5 o'clock, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about setting up a rehearsal schedule and blocking. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching. Bye.